No.
Warm water. No, I like this with the we grew up with this.
The Midrash. Midrash Tanchuma on our parsha of Mishpatim. It's Parshas Mishpatim. The Midrash says that Oz Melech Mishpat Ahev Ata Konanta Mesharim. This is a pasuk in Tehillim, which says that Hashem, you established Mesharim. So through your laws of justice, through the being a Melech of Mishpat, who loves Mishpat, you established Mesharim. So what are these Mesharim? Amar Rabbi Alexandri. Said Rabbi Alexandri, Shnei Chamarim Mahalchim Baderech. There were these two donkey men walking along the way with their donkeys. Sonim zelazeh, and they hated each other. These were enemies. Ravatz le'echad me'en chamara. One of them, his donkey collapsed. It got crushed. Chavero over v'ro'eu sheravatz tachlev masa'o. His friend passes by and sees that Chavero, calls him Chavero, his fellow. Ro'eu sheravatz tachat masa'o. Amar lo katuv b'Torah. Doesn't it say in the Torah, Kisire chamor sonacha, rovates tachas masa'o? If you will see the donkey of your enemy collapsing, buckling under the weight, v'chadalta me'azov lo, are you going to stop from helping him? Azov tazov imo, you should go help him. So he says to him, right? Azov tazov me'asa. What did he do? Chazar v'ta'an. He turned around. V'ta'an umilaveu. He lifted for him and he assisted him. V'hitchil mesiach imo. Yeah. Azov kima. Mikan. So he starts telling him, put a little bit down over here. Let go of that. Yeah, pick up over here. Arok mikan achi yitonimo, until they're just strategizing together of because the Torah told him he has to go help the donkey of his enemy, the guy. Nimtzu osin shalom beineim. They wound up making peace. The Midrash goes on. It says, look what happened. Chaver omer lo hayiti sover shehu soni. I used to think that he hated me. Ra'a. See how he treated me gently. He was mercy on me. See, when he saw me and my so they stopped at an inn along the way, at a bar. They ate together. They had a drink together. And they made up. They became friends. Hoy, that's what the Medrash means. Ata konanta mesharim. The next words are mishpatu tzedakah. So Hashem established mitzvahs that straighten out a person. Because you see what happens if you follow this mitzvah of doing a kindness for your enemy. So eventually, it stops being your enemy, and the guy they start to melt one to the other. That's the story that is told by the Midrash. So what is the pasuk? The pasuk is interesting. Pasuk says, Azov ta'azov imo. It's an interesting expression. And right, I'll just read the pasuk again, the full thing. Ki sir'et chamor sonacha. When you will see the chamor of your enemy, rovetz tachas masa'o, collapsing, crouching under his weight. V'chadalta me'azov lo, azov ta'azov imo. And you're tempted perhaps to not assist him. So Rashi learns it means v'chadalta me'azov lo. Are you gonna not help a human being who needs help? Azov ta'azov imo. Assist him. Now the word azov ta'azov is a bizarre way to say to help. La'azov means to leave something behind. So the truth is that Rashi seems to learn azov ta'azov imo, like the Midrash said, a language of azov po. In other words, take a little bit off over here, take a little bit off over there. So that's azov in that context is like to cause the weight to be diminished and abandoned from the back. However, there are others who learn it's lashon siyua v'chizuk. I'll tell you, Rabbi Kiva Eger used to like to say, there's a pasuk that says the azvu la'acherim chelam. It's a pasuk in Tehillim, and Tehillim 49. Here's the pasuk. Listen to this one. It says, everybody, chachamim yamutu yachad ksil uva'ar yoved. The wise die just like the foolish. Everybody has their day. Everyone you have ever met is going to die one day. That's what's going to happen. And you know what happens when they die? Ve'azvu la'acherim chelam. They leave all of their financial success behind to others. Can't take it with you. Yeah, you can't. That's right. Like people are buried in their Rolls Royce. You know, these funny stories. You can't take anything with you. You know, that's a big lesson. So that's the pasuk. So Rabbi Akiva Eger would take those three words out of context, and he would say, "What can you take with you?" The ozvu la'acherim milashon azov ta'azov imo. Whatever you helped other people with, that is chelam. That is your wealth, and that you do take with you. So in those very words, ve'ozvu la'acherim chelam, which is saying the futility of everything in this world, but the things that you do for other people, that's what you have forever. The Gemara says, melach mamon chaser. The Amrila Chesed. It's going to Ksubis. It says that melach, the way to salt, to preserve your money, your mamon, is chaser, is to give away from it. And others say chesed. They switch the dollar for the resh. Gemara brings both opinions. So the way to salt your money is to give it away. If you have $1,000 and you spend that $1,000 on a day at the spa or a nice meal in a restaurant or something, so the money's gone and you'll never get it back. But if you give that money to the poor, it's yours for eternity. That's the thing that you keep. So anything that a person, assists another person, okay, so that's a language, la'azov, azov ta'azov imo, but there's a targum on the pasuk. The targum says, what does it mean, azov ta'azov? What should you leave? He says, tishbok ma debelibcha alohi. Leave behind whatever stupid feelings you have in your heart. Whatever feelings you have in your heart against that person, leave those behind. Right? That's what you need to do and help him. But you see this guy, what are you going to not help him? Rather, leave behind your pettiness and help him. Now here's the problem. Who are we talking about, says Tosfos. Tosfos says, who are we talking about? Because we have a halacha as follows. And this is a very important thing to think about. What happens if you have there's two mitzvahs. One is to help a person load his animal, and one is to help a person unload his animal. So what happens if you have both those mitzvahs in front of you? Which one comes first? So the Gemara says, you always help unload first, because there's an additional concern of tsa'ar ba'alei chayim. There's a living being that is experiencing discomfort, where we don't have a rule, therefore, that you can't use donkeys for your loads. If it's productive and there's a good reason for it, we are prepared to kill animals to make a football or to eat lunch. We believe that that's part of the way the world works, and it's a totally appropriate use. We are not vegetarians. Somebody told me, Mr. Udler told me that he was once at Rabbi Graydon's Shabbos table, and there was a young woman there who says, I'm a vegetarian. And he says, Hitler was also vegetarian. That was his. In other words, this is not something that we consider morally superior. We don't think that just because a person's a vegetarian, they're more, or think about it, a vegan, more or less likely to be pro or against aborting fetuses at will, right? They wouldn't eat an egg, but they might eat a human. Why not? And a white wine sauce with some broccoli is delicious. It's totally right. I see that joke didn't go over well at all, but I think it's a very compelling point. What I'm saying, I once had a conversation years ago.
We do use it on our faces, like in a lot of skin creams that they have. I think like
Stem cells. Interesting. That is interesting. The truth is, so why not for lunch? But what's interesting also is how many people get stuck on this one. A person who is tremendously pro-choice and is also very pro-animal. And you ask them, "What am I allowed to give my dog an abortion?" And they get very, very confused about this. They don't know how to answer this one. They go back and forth. In other words, animal. Can I give my dog? Right? Very, very, very geschmack, that one, like to throw them into that loop. Okay,
I've had that question before, but I love that.
to actually in real
Yeah,
life,
like,
you say.
would you do it to your dog?
Right. They would never do it. Their dog, they want available on every street corner for, for a rebate. So, Sar Balechayim means meaningless and needless pain caused to animals. Therefore, if it would be for kaparos, so that a Jewish person could go have a meaningful experience before Rosh Hashanah, then it's not meaningful, and it's not meaningless, and it's not needless. It's very meaningful, and it's not a waste, et cetera, et cetera. But no one's eating it. Yeah, maybe no one's eating it. But if it has a good beneficial impact on it, okay. So now, however, in this case, you can choose one over the other. So you choose the thing that causes the least amount of suffering, even to an animal, because that does matter to us. It's not that it makes no difference to us. It's just in the hierarchy of important things, the fact that somebody would be out there protesting. There was last week, I passed by something, and they were protesting outside of some, fur or whatever, very upset about the animal. And there's people in Iran being shot in the streets, and like that's not relevant. The animal thing is, that's a morally sick. Okay, so what happens, however, if ohev lifrok v'son e liton? So we say that if there's te'ina, which is unloading an animal, that should come first to loading an animal. First unload, relieve the pain, and then help the second person load his animal. But what happens if the person who needs help unloading his animal is somebody who you love? He's your best friend. And the person who needs help loading his animal is your enemy. So then the Gemara says, mitzvah besone. There's a special mitzvah to help the one you hate. Kidei lakof et yitzro. In order to overcome and beat down, force your Yetzer Hara. Because you shouldn't really be hating people. And therefore, if you have negative feelings towards someone, you see from here that it's productive to do a nice thing for them. If you have negative feelings towards someone, do them a favor, do something nice. That's what Torah expects. And if you have two opportunities, the fact that normally this mitzvah, which is a mitzvah and contains alleviating the suffering of an animal, that's beneficial. This one has the benefit, however, of being a mitzvah and beating your Yetzer Hara. That comes first. So that's the most important thing. Okay, that's the Gemara. Says Tosos. Tosos says that it's clear that here we're talking about somebody who is, it's a mitzvah to hate. This chamor sonacha means a person who is wicked, and they're a Jew who is wicked, and therefore it's a mitzvah to hate them. And for such a person, says Tosos, if that's the case, because there's another Gemara that says that, so Tosos says, then why am I overcoming my Yetzer Hara? There are times when it is a mitzvah to hate somebody. In fact, a person who walks around and says, I don't know. Look, you believe it's according to your truth is that it's okay to molest children. Okay, listen, for you, if that works, great. For me, my truth, right? There's no such a thing, right? If you love your children, then you hate the person who wants to murder your children. You hate Hitler. Ohavei Hashem sinura. If you're totally, then you don't actually love. Instead, you cannot be an ally to everyone, because then you're an ally to no one, right? You have to pick a side here. And therefore, Halo misanecha Hashem esnaf. If somebody hates God, says King David, then I hate them too. L'oivim hayu li. They become my enemy. A person who's out there trying to kill my children, it is morally appropriate to hate that person, because it is the same thing as loving your children. And the person who says, I don't hate anyone, he doesn't love anyone. That's the truth. He doesn't love anyone, right? Yeah, of course.
What if somebody doesn't believe in God? Just, should we still hate them or try to?
Okay, it's a good question. The truth is that the Chazon Ish really writes about this, and he says that in old days it was different than now. He says now the appropriate thing is to pull them in with the bonds of love and only to show them instead. But in old times, you have to understand, it was very, very different, because imagine you have a society. I want to explain. The Chazon Ish is talking about a halacha that says that sometimes you have a rasha, a person who's wicked, living in a religious society, and he's breaking the Shabbat in public. So you know that we don't kill people for breaking Shabbat. We kill people for breaking Shabbat in public when they're in a society that has the death penalty and they are warned by two people. In public's not quite right, but in front of two people who say, we're going to go tell on you. and that this carries and the person says, I know, and afal pikin, and nevertheless, I intend to do this. Do you follow? So, in other words, this is an act of civil disobedience, attempting to undermine. The guy knows he's willing to give his life for this. He's mafkir atzmo lemisa. So we kill such a person. So you say, isn't that barbaric? I mean, why would you kill the person? Why not try to rehabilitate them? So do you know that in our society, we could save, they can find the exact number of lives that we could save if we would just lower the speed limit to 30 miles an hour and disable cars from being able to go over 30 miles an hour. So why do we allow that many people to die every month just so you can drive fast? You know that if we got rid of all cars, we could really lower. So you know what the answer is? Every one of us understands that the quality of life that it allows for people not to have to spend 3.5 hours driving to work in the valley, but instead being it right, that et cetera, is worthwhile. And even though people, if we just wouldn't have Disneyland, you know how many fewer cars would be on the road? We can tell you the number. We can say it's safe. Isn't human life the number one value? The answer is there's not a person in the world, except when talking about COVID, no one else ever believes that human life is the number one value. Better to just be safe at home, miserable and dying, but live a few hours longer. There's no one who believes that. Right? Nothing in society. So we say like this. A Jewish society believes that when an entire society keeps Torah and Mitzvos, the incredible value of keeping Shabbos in a full community, a full society, is so incredible that if there are a handful of lives that are lost in order to do that, we do that for everything else. Only, says the Chazon Ish, there used to be what's called a geder. There used to be a fence, and the fence was strong, and the communities were rich with Torah and with Judaism. He says today there's no fence left. So one guy breaking Shabbat has no influence on the community anymore. It's gone. So he says now, instead of trying to react harshly, which would have no impact, we should bring people in with the cords of love. But the idea is essentially the same. There are people that are a real threat. They're a real threat to generations of Judaism. A person who came in the time of Reform Judaism and started teaching all these ideals, and now we have a 60, 70%, right, intermarriage rate, and we have it's heartbreaking. The destruction that happened to the Jewish people because of these false and bad ideas is really, really destructive. And the same way that in anything else that would matter to the building of a society, so we're allowed to have our own set of these. Okay, so Tosfos says the following. He says, if this person is someone that you're supposed to hate, and the Torah is talking about these bizarre cases where it's someone you're supposed to hate, then why go help him? What are you improving in yourself by becoming friends with them? Right? So Tosfos says the following. He says, it's a very insightful thing. It may be a mitzvah to hate someone, but when you hate someone for whatever reason, kemayim hapanim lepanim, the way that works is that people reflect to one another. If you whisper to someone, they whisper back, right? In other words, when you, right, it's a very important thing. When you, and we do this, we mirror each other. So I don't know if this ever happens to you with small children, but you're driving in the car and the kids are whining about something. So you say to them, why are you whining all the time? And you whine right back at the kids, right? In exactly the same tone of voice, because people are mirrors. So the person will start to hate you if you hate him for religious reasons, because God said to him, but you really hate the person, he's going to hate you back. And then you know what happens, says Tosfos? Then you're going to hate him back. But this time, it's not just a purely religious attitude. It's also personal. So you hate him. So now he hates you. And he's like, oh, well, all these religious Jews are a bunch of garbage. So you're like, well, you're ugly, right? That's going to happen in your head. You're going to start to hate the person. And if you those feelings are not kosher. You're allowed to have an ideologically motivated position. But the minute that it's petty, then it's asur. So do you see what the Torah is doing? The Torah is saying that you have to be so careful, not just to have the right emotion, but why do you have that emotion? And if it's actually the fact that you're just a jerk, and in real life you'd be a jerk anyway, and now, right, you're an angry person. So the guy's an angry person. So now his child doesn't do the right thing. So he's screaming at his child. So he's really just an angry person. It's not that he cares about Shabbos or kosher or tefillin or anything else. So that's not allowed. That's not okay. It's only okay to have that feeling for the right reasons. It's a very sophisticated type of attitude. Okay. In any event, with that introduction about how the Torah's purpose is to get into that level of nuance in the human psyche, that's the purpose of the mitzvos. That's what Hashem established when He gave us the Torah. And we say in the beginning of the parsha, ve'ela hamishpatim. Also, ve'ela means also these are the rules. So says Rashi, I mean, what are you talking about? I mean, here we were not, right? What we were not talking about something before. Like, what's ve'ela and these? So, ve'ela is mosif ala rishonim. Ma rishonim misinai, af elu misinai. Just like there were 10 commandments given at Mount Sinai. So you have to know that this part of the Torah was also given at Sinai. All the rules of justice and all the rules of the Torah were given at Har Sinai. So this is something that, like, I had the opportunity to mention it in passing on Shabbat, and I thought to explore this a little more. You know, the Christians make a massive statement, and they say there were two parts of the law. There was the moral law in the Torah, two parts of Torah: the moral law and the ritual law. And the ritual law is a sacrifice, and it's the Sabbath, and all these other the moral, right? The actual way to keep Shabbos with 30 melachos, whatever these things are. The moral law is the 10 Commandments, which I don't think they're so careful about either. At least not the "don't thou shalt not murder" one. They kind of, weren't so good at that. But they believe that you're supposed to really keep the 10 Commandments and nothing else. And in fact, last Shabbat we read the 10 Commandments in shul. Everybody stands up. So the Rambam says you're not allowed to stand up. You're not allowed to stand up because the Gemara says that in the times of early Christianity, there were Jewish people who used to have a custom to want to say the 10 Commandments every day after davening, which is a nice idea because then everyone knows them all by heart. And the Gemara says that we don't do that because then people will say there's no Torah except for that. There were groups that were saying that's all that's left. So they have the moral law and then the ritual law. And they said the ritual law doesn't apply anymore. All these mitzvahs just don't, they're just nonsense. They're just a bunch of ways to try to trick God and make yourself look righteous. They say, unless you keep the entire thing, there's no value to any of it. That's what they say about the ritual law. Unless you keep if you make one mistake, you can't be saved. I don't know where they got an idea saved from. They made up that idea and then thrust it on the Torah about being saved or something. And that you're going to go to hell. And you can't be saved unless you keep everything perfectly. And no person is perfect. And therefore, you need to accept Jesus. That's right. I mean, what could be a better... so now...
Reform said roughly the same thing. Reform 2.0.
Yes. In other words, it's remarkably common how much this Christian attitude seeped into Jews in Christian countries who started to think, well, I'm a good person. Why? Well, I haven't killed anyone. Well, mazel tov. Right? Like, what did you do to be a good person? Well, I'm not hurting any. Like, yeah, is that what it takes to be? That's a really successful life you just lived, where you haven't murdered people in cold blood. That's the big thing. It's not a Jewish attitude. It's not the Jewish attitude says the following. I show you at the end of Parshas Yisro, right between the 10 Commandments and Mishpatim. So in other words, just the previous thing in the Torah goes as follows. It's remarkable. You finish the 10 Commandments. The entire nation saw the voices. Yeah, they could hear sound, and they could see. They could see the like roim es hakolos. They could see the sound, right? And they could hear what you normally see and see what you normally hear. That's a lapidim v'eskol shofar. Okay. So they saw things that very high level of spiritual attainment. Moshe goes in to the Arafel, into the clouds where God is found. And God says to Moshe, you saw that from the heavens I spoke to you. So I have 3 commandments for you. I don't want you to make any images in gold and silver, right? Of the sun, the moon. Secondly, when you make an altar, I don't want you to use any stone that is cut with metal. So lo tivneos on gazit. Instead, it's a mizbach avanim. It's stones that have to be complete stones. You can't carve them at all, because ki charbecha henafta ala utachala vatachala. Because you've used a sword. Using metal to cut a stone is a warlike behavior, and it's similar to violence. And don't climb up with steps to the mizbeach. It needs to be a ramp. Those are the 3 commandments. And then Kaddish, and we lift the Torah up, and like, wait a minute, this was the 10, and then it's Mishpatim. So what is this bridge? So these 3 things, says the Kliyakar in one of his Svarim, he says these 3 things are the 3 cardinal sins. One of them is like murder. One of them is like sexual immorality. I'll explain that one in a second. And one of them is idolatry. It means, let's explain. How are they the 3? So idolatry, in other words, be very careful even of the signs and symbols you hang around your home. Pictures of the sun and the moon, that's risky. Be careful. Secondly, when you need to stay so far away from murder that when you have an altar that you're using to bring peace to the world, to bring peace between man and God, etc., so you don't cut that with a knife, because that's somehow linked to a violence. And when you're walking up the Mizbeach, so they would wear skirts in the olden days, everyone wore robes, and you have to take bigger steps. So it should be, on a ramp, you can take smaller steps. Now, even though they wore pants, Rashi says, the Kohanim wore pants under their skirt. Nevertheless, even with pants, spreading your legs wide is itself a form of like disrespect. It's karov, legilui erva. So, man spreading, right? Like that's a way that a person should be careful with such behavior. Still, why is that after the 10 Commandments? So I want to explain. Because the 10 Commandments is not just the 10 Commandments. It's to describe to you, here's what the Torah is. Here's what the Torah is. The Torah is a plan and a method to elevate and change a person so that you become a more sensitive person. And Rashi says, why are we given these commands about stones? Because we should learn if to etzim va'avanim, if to stones and wood we're expected to have a degree of respect, certainly to another human being who's in the image of God. You see, a person who treats other people with respect or doesn't murder people may not be a good person. They may just have enough compassion not to do that to the other person. But who are they? Have they changed? Here's how you can tell. Moshe Rabbeinu was such a grateful person that even when gratitude would have no impact on the other being, like it was the water that floated him as a baby, he wouldn't hit the water. When it was the dirt that buried somebody who he needed buried, he wouldn't hit the dirt. So what do I learn from there? That gratitude is a midah in a person. A person who exists with gratitude is a different human being. So even if the other person out there doesn't appreciate your gratitude, doesn't know about your gratitude, you're expected to have gratitude. It's not about saying, thank you, right? Thank you, Ira, for the beautiful sefer, right? That's not enough. If inside I don't feel that gratitude behind closed doors, I haven't gotten the message of the Torah. If don't murder doesn't therefore change the way you will behave towards rocks, then you haven't gotten the idea of the Torah. The Torah is here to elevate every little beat, every little part of the person's life. And so on the 3 major areas, we're shown that. Then, ve'el ha'mishpatim. By the way, these rules, which you know what they're going to do, we read in the Midrash. It's going to take fights and calm them. Jewish people who follow the laws of Lashon Hara, I'm thinking of a friend of mine who's a very elevated person, and he's a really refined person. And he went through a difficult divorce. And he won't tell anyone anything, because he's very careful about the laws of Lashon Hara. So if he needs a therapist, he finds a therapist. But I talk to him all the time, and I'm close to him. I don't know a thing about what happened. I don't know one story. Because he asked his Rebbe about what he's allowed to say, what he's not allowed to say, and he's careful about what it says in the Torah, and that's an unbelievable thing. And it's a remarkable device that the Torah has with all of these mitzvos to refine a person to the point that they experience life completely differently. Avraham Avinu was a very kind man, and he had a lot of guests, and we know only one story in depth about how he treated the guests. And according to our sages, they were angels. According to the Psukim, it turns out they were angels. These people who he had over weren't people. So that's really weird, because they weren't hungry, and they didn't need the shade. The one time you're going to teach me this lesson is the one time that it wasn't even really chesed? Sure, he meant well. The answer is no. Because that's what I need to know. What I need to know about Avraham Avinu is not that when someone was hungry, he got them food. I need to know what it did to him. Who was he? Forget the other person. Who was he? There are many people who, if you cry, and if you feel like a person with the hardest heart can sometimes have moments of compassion. But who did he become from it is highlighted when it's just him in the story. and everything else is not really there. Okay. Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah. There's a sefer called Drushos Upirushe Rabbeinu Yonah on Chumash from the Rishon. So he says, why does it say, I am the Lord your God, Asher Hotzesicha, who took you out of the land of Egypt, as an introduction to the Ten Commandments? Right? All the Rishonim deal with this question. There's a lot of different answers, right? Because you would assume God would introduce himself as, I am the Lord who created the entire universe, not the one who took you out of Egypt. So why did he highlight that? Because as you know, Kol mitzvot shebat Torah heim leto'elet ha'adam. Every mitzvah in the Torah is for the benefit of the human being. Kemosha Nemar, as the pasuk says, Vayitzavenu Hashem lasos, as kol hachukim ha'ela, Hashem commanded us to do kol hachukim ha'ela, all of these mysterious mitzvahs, litov lanu, because that is good for us, to be good to us. Kol hayamim, all through life. L'chayosenu kayom hazeh. The purpose of the mitzvahs is because your life is better when you do the mitzvahs. Hashem gave us all the mitzvahs to be good to us. There is no mitzvah that doesn't improve your life and make it better. L'tov lanu kol hayamim. Ubal lomar, afal pi sheyesh mitzvos, even though there are mitzvahs, says Rabbeinu Yonah, God is introducing a new relationship with the Jewish people that's going to begin with the Ten Commandments and turn into an entire Torah. So the first words are, even though there are mitzvahs that may be difficult, lefi teva ha'adam, according to the natural behaviors of a person, ro'oi lecha lismoch bahem, you should fully trust the mitzvahs. Right? Trust me about the mitzvahs. Achar shehotzesicha me'eretz Yisrael, because I just took you out of Egypt. I showed you how much I love you. Yeda she'eni mitzaveh oscha. God says you need, if you believe in a loving God, then you would also believe He never commands you anything except davar hamo'il ulahatzil otcha min hanezek. There's nothing God has ever commanded a person that isn't the absolute best thing for you, that saves you from trouble. That's the purpose. The purpose of the Torah is to make your life a better life and save you from trouble. I have here from the introduction. So this is what I shared. I did share this on Shabbos. Sometimes what happens is I have a chance to give a drasha in shul, and if it gets anywhere near 15 minutes, it really got to end. 10 to 15 minutes is like the window. If it's really interesting, you can keep going a little bit, but that's what it is. So to really explore something, at the root, sometimes I'll speak about something on Shabbos and then realize I really need to do a shir about it during the week at some point soon. So you didn't miss anything. You'll get a recap here. You shouldn't feel a FOMO. Ma shmua shama uba v'niskaya. Gemara in Zvachim says, what did Yisro hear that caused him to come and convert? So Yitro was this great, sophisticated man, right? And he's an advisor to the pharaohs. He's a leader of his country. So what is it that brought him to decide to convert and change his entire life? So Gemara has three positions. Rabbi Yeshua says he heard about the war of Amalek that they waged against the Jewish people. Rabbi Elazar Hamodoi says he heard about the giving of the Torah, Matan Torah, and Yisro arrived after that. And Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says he heard about the splitting of the sea. So what are these? So says Reb Moshe David Tendler, my wife's grandfather, Saba Moshe. He has a book called Pardes Rimonim. Pardes Rimonim was a book that he wrote to teach American Jews who were not all yet so observant at the time. So in the 60s, I think he wrote this. The laws of Jewish family purity. And the problem is when people hear about the laws of Nida, they often think of something that's there to rob you of joy and happiness. And it's unnatural and it's not normal. And how could I even consider such an ancient, ridiculous practice? So In his introduction to that book, he says the following: what motivates a man to change his lifestyle? Yisro, high priest of the leading idolatrous cults of his time, he is advisor to pharaohs of Egypt. He forsakes all the prestige and glory of his social status to join a nation of freed slaves in the desert. Why does he do that? So his first suggestion, one of the rabbis of the Gemara says, you know what he saw? He saw Milchemes Amalek. He realized that the existing social order condones purposeless evil. That the existing world as we have it today will bring the morals of our society, will cause every college student worth their salt to support Hamas. That's what it will do. That's what comes out of secularism. That's what comes. So he knows he saw the cruelty of Amalek, and that's what he said, I need a new society. I need a new life. Okay. However, Rabbi Lazar Hamodai doesn't accept this, says Saba Moshe, perhaps because he says, in history, most people that look at the cruelty of human beings become more jaded and become less confident that there is a solution. To the contrary, such realizations often paralyze a person's mind and heart, and they lead to the acceptance of the beast that is man. And there's in all societies, in all times, there were these sort of dropouts, he calls them, whose conclusion that society is sick with an incurable malady, social and ethical ills, and the gratification of the moment became their goal, and that was it. You then also have, so that's not enough. And he says, you know what there needs to be? There needs to be the giving of the Torah. That's what we need. Matan Torah, the awareness that there is a plan, there's a method, there's a Torah that tells you how to live and how to build a good society. And so, in other words, if humans are horrible when left to their own devices, that's going to cause me to go join another group of people? The answer is not until that other group of people have a Torah. Then I can join them. That's a second opinion. And the third opinion says it was still not enough. Even those two were not enough because the Torah is totally impractical. All these things you're telling me to do go against human nature. But then when you see the splitting of the sea, where you see the same God of nature is the God of the Torah, in other words, that the Torah is not telling you anything that's antithetical to nature. The Torah is exactly the right way to live. It's the healthiest person. The people you meet who really live the values of the Torah, they are the happiest ones. They're the most fulfilled ones. It is every shortcoming that we have of not fulfilling the Torah that is the cause of every one of our sadnesses. I heard something unbelievable last night about Rabbi Moskowitz of Medrash Shmuel. Rabbi Moskowitz of Medrash Shmuel is really a very in Yerushalayim, right in the neighborhood. Is a big tzaddik. He's a big Rosh Hashiva. He's a very big person, a big leader, and that he once had a tragedy. There was a tragedy apparently when he lived in London, and there was a house fire, and I think children of his perished in the fire, and the police came down, and they almost arrested him, this person said, because he was so calm that they couldn't believe that he hadn't committed the crime or something. And that, the level of incredible bitachon, despite, he was obviously very broken by this, but the level of calm, they'd never seen such a thing. And that's a very deep thing, that the Jewish person who's living with Hashem, who's living with these things, is the one most equipped to deal with tragedy. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't experience emotions, don't experience it, but I was very taken by the story. There's always, by the way, a person out there who, whenever they hear any story about anything, they try to find a way that it's a bad story. Oh, so they didn't have any. That's not true. If you know the person is a person with tremendous emotion and tremendous feeling and tremendous warmth and love and knows how to cry too, but there's a lot of depth to that story. So in any event, the purpose of all the mitzvos, that is the thing, says Abba Moshe. And what he's trying to say is that a person has to realize when they're going to open their eyes to the idea that the Torah has a system of religious, family purity and how to live in such a way, that those are things that elevate and ennoble a person and make life better and richer and more wonderful and not the other way around. And that's a challenge for people to understand. The Christians who look at it as ritual law, they don't understand what we're saying, because we're saying Ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakos es Yisrael. Hashem wanted to, we're going to translate it as refine the Jewish people, because we know Shem and Zay is Zach. Zach is refined. So I've seen that the son of the Tiferes Yisrael, I'll read you something from him in a second, in his Sefer Misgeret Zahav, which is on Pirkei Avos. So the Mishnah says, Rabbi Hanania ben Akash Ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakos es Yisrael. Hashem wanted to refine the Jewish people, to make them more refined. Therefore, He gave them lots of Torah and mitzvos. Here, Balahem Torah and mitzvos. That was the purpose, or the language of the Rambam. The Rambam has a beautiful language. So he says that Rov Dinei HaTorah, the many rules that you'll find in the Torah, are only etzos meirachok. They are, here's the language. It's a beautiful, beautiful language. Let me read the exact language. Kol ela hadvarim k'tei lakuf es yitzro ulesaken de osaf. The purpose he describes of the mitzvah called temura. Temura is a requirement in the Torah that a person who has an animal that was set aside for a sacrifice is not allowed to switch that animal onto another animal. And the penalty is if you try to do that, you try to say, actually, instead of bringing animal A, I'll bring animal B, the Kedusha just spreads, and you have to bring both of them. And he says the reason is because people really can be cheap, and they can start to love their money too much. And therefore, they're going to try to put the better animal and whatever. And so even the Torah says, no doing this, even Rabba Tov, Tov Ra, no matter what. Yeah.
Does that apply to cats as well?
No, it doesn't. Well, if you set aside something as belonging to Hektish, you took something and you said, this belongs to the Beis HaMikdash or something, then you have a bit of a problem. It's not, you'd have to figure it.
You put money into tzedakah box.
Yeah, so that's fine.
And then you
Yeah.
count it, and
And then you
total it.
sell the money to BK, like, as a hypothetical example. Great idea. Yeah, that's totally fine. But Tamura is specifically about animals, is right. It's like something that it achieved Kedusha already. So, and he says, because Rov Dinei HaTorah. Now, Rov can sometimes mean the majority of, but it can also mean the many. The many. So when we say Rov Banav, the Kinyanov, Al Ha'etz Talisa, we say about Haman, we don't mean that the majority of his children were hung on the tree. We mean his many children and his many possessions, right? We're all hung on the tree. I got to find out what it means about the possessions. We'll talk about that one time. It's getting close to Purim, so maybe we'll do a share on that. It's very interesting what that means. Blaming it on the tree, yeah, but real, actual Torah and Purim Torah at once. So Rov Dinei HaTorah Einon Ela Eitzos Meirachok Megadol HaEitza. The many, the massive. You see these volumes of, like, on Shabbat, it's a day of rest. So rest. What is this about if you wrote 2 letters or 3 letters or this? What is that? This is crazy. There's a bunch of OCD, right? That's like the attitude that a lot of people have towards halacha, and their grandchildren are usually goyim when they have that attitude, unfortunately. But Rov Dinei HaTorah, the many rules, the volumes and volumes that you see of the laws of the Torah, Einon Ella, they are nothing except Eitzot Meirachok, pieces of good advice from afar, from God who has the bird's eye view, is telling you what Megadol Ha'etza, from the greatest advisor, Litaken Hadeot, to fix people's attitudes, Uleyasher Kol Hamaasim, and to straighten out every behavior. That's the purpose of the mitzvahs. There is nothing else to the Torah except for the best possible advice from the best possible advisor. That's what it is. There's the attitude of, look, if you cause yourself suffering in this lifetime, right? As a teenager, I read the Da Vinci Code. And in the Da Vinci Code, they tell you about this real group of people called Opus Dei. Means the work of God, Opus Dei. It's a group of people who are very religious, Catholics, and they cause themselves incredible suffering. I remember the image of the person who wears some sort of ring around his thigh with spikes in it, so that he's always drawing blood, because that's what you need to do. You need to cause yourself suffering, then you go to heaven, right? You can have this attitude in Judaism. You can have people have the attitude of, like, the more that you cause yourself pain and suffering, and you fast and you do all these things, and you roll around in the snow, the more points you get in heaven. So mitzvahs are just basically a way to torture yourself and to deny yourself this world, right? And there's people that really can have this attitude, and anything you enjoy takes what you should eat some ice cream, so you're finished. I mean, and that's what life is about. The Rambam says that's absolutely false. The purpose of it. So, but now you understand why the Christians will say there's the moral law and the ritual, because the ritual law was just nonsense. And if you torture yourself with these things, you could have gone to heaven. But if you're not going to be perfect, you must do nothing. But if the purpose of all the mitzvahs is to refine you and elevate you and make you a better, more impressive human being, so then what do you talk? So what if you only become 99%? If you're only going to be a 95% perfect parent instead of a 20%, that's an enormous achievement. Suddenly your kids are not completely messed up, right? Like, that's great. And in everything in life, would you rather be married to somebody, in a relationship with somebody who's like 98% good? No, they got one thing wrong. That's it. That's crazy. That's not real. So they completely missed the boat. They completely misunderstood. And then it's like, oh, these Jews, they're just trying to trick God with their rituals. And that's why they have to, slaughter Christian babies for the matzah. And if you know anything about the Torah, you would understand that that's not what this is. But this is why they can't. I believe that one reason that the Goyim, for 2,000 years, and they're doing it again, the Talmud is all great. It's the same stuff. You read the debate of the Ramban in the 1200s, he's answering the same questions that they're asking on TikTok now. It's the same stuff. The Ramban went through it point by point with members, against Pablo Cristiani in front of the King James. I mean, same questions. But what's missing is this idea. The Jewish people got the Torah. And when they got the Torah in a place called Sinai, and the Gemara says Sinai comes from the word sin'ah, comes from the word hatred, because Misham Yarda Sin'ah Le'umot HaOlam. Explains some of the Mefarshim. I saw they say for Yad Yosef, and others, it's a machlokas, we shouldn't have had to learn that. But one opinion is that that's when they started hating us. As soon as we got the Torah, they started hating us. You see, the message of the Torah, we have this teaching that God went around to the nations. He said, "Do you want the Torah?" And every one of them essentially said, "Well, tell me what it says in it." Like, I don't want to do that. That will make my life miserable. There's a language in the Midrash that says God told each one of them something that would be hard for that nation. So he told one group you shouldn't steal, and they said the whole kol atzmuto shel avinu, right? The whole essence of our ancestor was stealing. And the children of Esav, he told them, and the Midrash says kol atzmuso, the whole essence. You see, these were all things that are part of the Noahide laws anyway. But the Torah, by the way, has a lot more rules about stealing. The Noahide laws have some basic ones, right? Murder, there's some basic ones. The Torah has a million applications of what would be considered stealing, and this one and that one, and little tiny things that the Goyim don't have. But what are they so worried about? You know what the answer is? What we said over here, that if the Torah is going to try to change you into a different person, you have to believe that that's a good person. If you see 10 commandments and then a bunch of ritual law, so then there's no Torah for you. You can't get this whole point. It has to be something that's going to change a human being and totally work to make them a new person. That's the purpose of Torah. He says here, this was the Sefer Misgeres Zahav on Pirkei Avos. So he's the son of the Tiferes Yisrael, Lipshitz. And he says that when it says Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu Lezakos Es Yisrael, he says, he brings a Gemara. And the Gemara says, Or Zarua Latzadik Uleyishrei Leiv Simcha. Pasuk says, light is planted for the tzaddik, and if you've got a straight heart, you experience simcha. So he quotes a Gemara that says, not everybody gets light, and not everybody gets simcha. Tzaddikim get ora, and yesharim get simcha. So he says, what does that mean? Light is all along, right, a metaphor for simcha. LaYehudim haisa ora. Right? The Jewish people at the time of Purim, when they finally were no longer under the threat of death, they had light. Ora is joy. He says, but the tzaddik is a person who struggles and wins in conquering his Yetzer Hara, but he's in the middle of the battle. And to such a person, joy is not yet available. It's planted. Or zarua la tzaddik. Shema'utad lotzes mitachas charulei ha'adama. It's eventually going to blossom. He's doing the hard work that will eventually blossom into tremendous simcha. And that's the light. Aval adayim lo yetze, or yatza, right? It hasn't yet come out. Ma'ashekin hayashar life. Once the person gets to the level in life where their heart has become straightened out, then they experience the simcha that was planted long before. Hine parcha hagefen, heinetzu arimonim. Upri matok shel hasimcha toli ve'omed be'gmar bishulo. It's now ripened the true joy and the fruit of happiness. He says that's what Rabbi Hanan ben Akasha was saying. Hashem wanted lizakot et Yisrael. Lizakech osam milashon shemen zayizach. He says this exactly, that Hashem wanted to refine the Jews, and that's what all the mitzvahs are for. That's why we have so many mitzvahs. Muchsharim umezukakim bepnimiyut libam v'nafsham mikol chalaot hachisaron. That these people will then, the purpose of Torah is that in our deepest hearts we will be absent of any joy. So absent of any lacking, of any chisaron, and that's really where the joy will come from. Is when we're no longer crooked. A person who doesn't find joy in Torah or mitzvos has something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with the Torah and mitzvahs. And that's why we say derech eretz kamal Torah. Being a healthy person is a prerequisite for Torah, because a person doesn't have derech eretz. It needs to be healthy, to be adjusted, to be. So then there's people that are sick, and everything bitter tastes sweet, and everything sweet tastes bitter. Right? The Ram talks about this, that there's sicknesses like this, and so you can't trust a person just because they say they don't enjoy. To take a while, a person sits down to learn, says, I don't enjoy learning Torah. It's not possible. It's only possible if there's something else going on in your head. There's something else going on. If you could just get free of all that nonsense, you will enjoy. Somebody asked me, I did a live question and answer session last week on the Meaningful Minute, and so someone says, if I give tzedakah, give charity to the poor, and I don't feel good afterwards, should I still do it? That was their question. And what I said is, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible. The greatest joy in the world is to be like God, to be able to give, to be able to help others. Like we said earlier in the beginning of this year, that's the greatest spiritual achievement. If you find that you get no joy out of giving, so then there's something wrong with you before, and we need to work on those things so that we can enjoy it. It's like a person says, when I don't enjoy good food, I only enjoy eating sewage. So we say, like, no, that's not something that you shouldn't therefore continue to eat that and stop eating nutritious food. Instead, you should figure out how to solve that problem so you can get back to the place where you find the joy that is inherent in human beings. And the Torah is exactly that way. The Gemara says that Rav Meir said, the great Rav Meir said, "Mipnei amra Torah." This goes with Savalosh. Why did the Torah say nida l'shiva? Why did the Torah say that a husband and a wife, when she becomes a nida, she goes through a process which has 7 days before she can eventually be permitted back, a husband and wife, to be together? So this is because people that are together all the time, they get tired of each other, and the Torah says, let them separate, so that she should have the experience like a bride on her wedding night. So what you see from here is that the purpose, Rav Meir was not embarrassed to say this, that the purpose of these different laws that we have in the Torah is to enhance a person's experience in this world. The same part of me that wants my children to be healthy, please God, and they should be successful, and they should have nice lives, wants them to be passionately religious Jews who are careful about every mitzvah. It's the same part. It's not a separate thing that, like, I need them to look a certain way for the neighborhood, or I want them to be very religious because as a religious attitude, the same secular attitude. There's a book that's almost exclusively about this subject. Rav Hirsch wrote a letter that he wrote anonymously. He wrote a book, rather, of letters that he wrote anonymously called The 19 Letters of Ben Uziel. And this is right at the beginning of the Reform movement is starting to take off. He gets, this Naphtali and Binyamin. So Benjamin writes a letter to his friend Naphtali, I think I have those names correct, where he just basically explains that Judaism is a terrible, terrible religion. The mitzvahs are just ridiculous and everything beautiful. The Jews are not interested in. And my dear Naphtali, writes Benjamin. And he starts to go on about how he says, you became a rabbi. He says, halacha is chiefly at fault for all of this. He says, the law itself ruins all enjoyments. It's a hindrance to all the pleasures of life. For 2,000 years, we are the plaything of fate, a ball tossed from hand to hand, even in the present times. This is in the early 1800s, driven from all paths of happiness. And as for the perfecting of human acquirements, what culture, what conquest in the domain of science, art, or invention? In a word, what great achievements have Jews wrought compared to Egyptians, Phoenicians, Greeks, Romans, Italians, French, English, or Germans? robbed of all the characteristics of nationality. We are nevertheless deemed a nation. Every one of us is by birth doomed to form an additional link in this never-ending chain of misery. Halacha is chiefly at fault for all of this. By enjoining isolation in life, arousing suspicion and hostility, breaking the spirit, and he goes on to say every complaint, very eloquently, every complaint against halachic Judaism. What's wrong with it? Then Rav Hirsch writes back, it's Rav Hirsch writing, 18 letters where he acknowledges, it's called the 19 letters, so letter one is from, he writes back these letters. It's not so long either, because if you see here, like the way these pages are printed, it's there's a reprint, but it's a pretty small, it's like 200 pages, and it's not really 200 pages, and he goes through these magnificent explanations of what Torah is, and starting from the beginning, and what are the mitzvos, and he spends some time explaining that uncomprehended Judaism as a mechanical habit, which is called mitzvos anoshim milumada. When people practice without the spirit, they bear it in their hands as a sacred relic, a revered mummy, and fear to rouse its spirit. Isn't that interesting? People that are like keeping Judaism as if tending to a mummy and being scared that it will wake up. They like just want to, leave it in the corner. They look at Judaism as a lifeless framework, as something which should be laid in the grave of a long since dead and buried past. They seek its spirit and they can't find it. And then he goes on to explain how there's only one way to salvation. Forget the inherited prejudices and opinions concerning Judaism, and go back to the sources of Judaism. Go to the Bible, the Talmud, the Midrash. Read, study, comprehend them in order to live them, to draw from them the teachings of Judaism concerning God, the world, the human race, Israel, according to history and precept. And then he starts to talk about how each mitzvah, he talks about the beauty of the holy language. Yes, you have to study the Bible in the Hebrew so you could see all the things. That was a big part of Hirsch, seeing the nuance in the language. That's a big part of his commentary. But in the end, he says that this is the purpose, to understand that every single one of the mitzvos have these incredible lessons and the ability to completely change and transform a human being. And you'll find that these are the finest people in the world. It really, really works. The people who keep the Torah and keep the mitzvahs, they are the finest people in the world. And they're the ones who are studying the Talmud intensely and on the focused way. Whatever Jeffrey Epstein may have done, it's not because he was busy learning Daf Yomi. And the Talmud is it's the silliest thing you could ever imagine, right? It's really the opposite. And it's very, very important for us to realize that as long as a person is healthy and is growing in the right speed, every single thing in Torah that a person does that's a little bit more, that's a little bit better, that's following what it says in Shulchan Aruch, is the greatest possible elevation of their happiness, of their internal world. It's going to change the way they see things. It's going to bring them calm. It's going to bring them joy. It's going to bring them connection. In no way, Ein Adam Shomei Ali Umafsid, says the Medrash. No person has ever listened to me and lost out for it. It just can't be. Obeying the Torah is a route to happiness. So let's not go in 50%. You cannot learn how to swim if you insist on keeping one foot on dry land at all times, right? You have to be in. A person who's into so it's not, well, I'll keep some things, I'll keep some other things, in that sense, it's worth it. If a person's just going to do a little bit, it's worth it. But they're kind of missing the boat because they're forgetting that the purpose of the Torah is to elevate our lives. And if we have this attitude of, I'll do some Torah and mitzvahs, that way I can go to heaven for a little bit. I'll get something. I don't want to be nothing. At the same time, I want to kind of enjoy this life. So that person has missed one of those basic teachings of Torah and mitzvahs. And I'll just tell you one final story and finish with the story. So there was a Rabbi Pesach Kron had the story of a rabbi and a rebbitzin who, this is a story that's always had a big impact on me, who were in Camp Silver Lake. That's where they were in. That's where they would go to Camp of Mendelssohn. I don't know. And there was a Rosh Hashiva who would go in the summer with his wife to this camp, and they got to. The Rosh Hashiva had a heart attack. He was an old man with a heart attack, and his wife of 60 years or something follows him in a car when he's in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. That's the story, and he dies in the hospital. And the Hatzalah man who took him in his ambulance, whatever, to the hospital, is now tasked with this job of going to the Rebbitzin going to a wife of 60 years and telling her that her husband just died. So he comes into the room and she's sitting there saying to him, and he says, Rebbitzin, I'm so sorry to have to give you such bad news, but the Rosh Hashiva just passed away. Her husband passed away. So she looks at him and she says, thank you so much for everything you did and for telling me that. It must have been really hard for you to have to tell me that. And then she couldn't control herself and she started crying. She ripped her clothes. She did whatever the halachos are of how to handle a death. But in other words, in that moment, now it's like a superhuman type of a thing, because most of us, this is my time. It's about me now. I'm selfish. I'm experiencing a loss, right? Like, to be nuanced enough to experience that this person has done you a kindness. It's uncomfortable. I never saw that in a movie where the soldiers came up, right, knocked on the door of the person's house to tell them that they and the person said, thank you for the sensitive way that you told me that. It must have been a very difficult thing for you to tell me. But that's the truth. To be that elevated of a person, that you're experiencing life so intensely that you feel what this other person said and you validate them and you also deal with your own emotions. That's what the Torah is trying to do for us. In other words, that's who we become when we pay attention to the Torah. I hate this person. Do I hate them because they hate me because I hated them and I'm allowed to have this feeling but not that feeling, and let me work inside my heart. That internal focus that the Torah gives us, it teaches us how to handle. If you have a disagreement with someone and you do them a favor and it brings shalom to the world, Talmidei Chacham Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. Torah scholars wind up bringing more and more peace and more harmony to the world, and we all want to be Torah scholars. We all want to get it right. So, I think that by reinforcing in our own minds and making sure that we try to project, at least within the Torah community, that the purpose of Torah and Mitzvos is this. It's the most refined, it's the most elevated. The people who truly keep the Torah, the closer you get to them and the more you get to know them, you will find that they are deeper and more sophisticated people. The heroes of the Goyim, the closer you get to them, they are more rotten than the next one. The closer you will get to presidents, right, and to people of fame, the more you will generally find more and more weaknesses. And with Torah scholars, it's the opposite. The closer you get to them, the more unbelievable. The more you'll hear stories like this Rebbitzin, right, who in the most difficult times was a sensitive, caring, sophisticated human being. That is what we're aspiring for. That is the great Masorah that we are privileged to bear and pass along, Bez Hashem, to future generations. Okay,
I have a question.